When my friend got hit in the face with a piece of broccoli. What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? Back in college, I was eating at Chipotle with my friend Anthony, who is typically a pretty suave guy. As we were talking, he was alternating between taking sips of his beer and dumping Tabasco on his burrito before taking a bite. He gets lost in our conversation and I see him grab the Tabasco and start bringing it to his lips before catching himself and grabbing his beer instead. Then I see him do it again, getting even closer to his mouth this time before realizing his mistake. He laughs it off. Another minute goes by and, exceeding all expectations, he grabs his beer and pours it into his burrito. When my daughter was little, she literally could not stop talking. She has ADHD and that's just one of the effects. One day, we were walking by an abandoned lot, looked like an old gas station or something. My daughter looked at it and said, "Wow, that's a beautiful yard." I said, "That's a lot." She said, "Yeah. A lot of beautiful yard." One day I was cutting a huge piece of the lawn after a light rain, and stirred up a bunch of bugs. Some swallows must have noticed and went on a sort of feeding frenzy all around me for like half hour. I would be riding along and a bird would swoop what felt like inches from my head, and then spiral all around to catch more bugs. After watching them for a minute or so I knew they wouldn't crash into me, so it was like being given a private air show. My brother and I went to the dollar store one day and went through every aisle and put anything in the cart that we thought was cool. We kinda messed around and ended up putting away 80% of it. But I don't hang out one-on-one with him much, so it made me happy. The last time I saw my great-grandma, Claudine. She was 98 and had horrible dementia. She didn't recognize my grandmother, her daughter, and it was honestly very sad. We were going to her house because my papa, her husband, died and we needed to go to his funeral. Before we left we got a car wash and one of the guys there gave us a red carnation. It was a weird promotion or something I think. But after a 10+ hour drive, we made it to her house. I rushed inside and overheard my grandma begging my great-grandma to remember her because my grandma had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She kicked its ass and beat it. I gave her a second and knocked, then walked in. The very first thing my great-grandma said when she saw me was, "Is that my beautiful my name?" I nearly cried just from that. My grandma was super happy she remembered me but sad she didn't remember her and decided I should spend time with her alone. She went off to go get some food I think, but I don't really know. So it was just me and my grandma. We chatted for a while and the inevitable question finally came up, "Me, who was that woman in here earlier?" "That's your daughter, Grandma." "Oh really? Why does her hair look so weird?" "Oh, it's a wig. She is bald now." I couldn't bring myself to tell her daughter had cancer, even though she wouldn't remember. She giggled a bit then attempted to pull me in, and said, "I'm gonna steal her wig." I laughed. She couldn't walk or lift her own arms on her own, let alone snatch a wig right off of my grandmother's head. After about an hour my tummy started to grumble so I called my grandma back in and went to the kitchen for some potatoes. After maybe 5 minutes I heard my grandma scream. I was afraid my great-grandma finally had died and rushed in, but it wasn't that at all. My great-grandma did it. She ripped the wig right off of my grandma's head. She told her to come close to whisper a secret and with all her might snatched it. She went on to love in a care home and got into many more antics, and would call once a week begging me to steal her away and start a traveling band. Mine would be when I first started talking to my so. I had been asking coworkers about her for some time and then I found out that she was asking about me as well. We would talk here and there but I never had the guts to ask her on a date. When I finally built up the courage to ask her out on a date, she was saying yes before I even asked. We were laughing like schoolgirls because I literally only asked if I could ask her something. It makes me smile because I always had low self-esteem and underestimated how much I was worth in a sense of what I could bring to the table in a relationship. Having her love and support just makes me so incredibly happy now and that memory just stands out during the good and the hard times. About a year ago, I was in a discount grocery store. I had about $20 left after bills and rent, so I was having to carefully pick what to buy. In the end, after umming and ahhing for a couple of minutes over whether I could afford to spend $6 on coffee, I put it back on the shelf and went to the register. As I'm walking out of the shop I hear a woman call after me, "Young man, you forgot this." I turn around and she thrusts the jar of coffee into my bag. I go to protest and she cuts me off saying, I remember what it was like, not having enough money and having to go without. You take that coffee and enjoy it, mate, the biggest smile on her face. She was like a beacon of light during one of my darkest times, and I always remember her. With every cup of coffee I can't help but smile. Because now each cup reminds me there are truly good people in the world. My mom would sing and dance in the kitchen every Sunday morning when I was growing up. Times were always tough and money was always tight, but my mom always made sure we were happy and healthy. One particular day when I was 8, I was woken up by the sound of Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" blasting through the house and my mom singing off key. As I walked to the kitchen, the smell of chorizo and eggs filled the air, and there I saw her. My mom, who only a few days earlier looked so miserable with her life, was dancing her heart out with a spatula in hand. When she passed away 7 years later, I cried every time I thought of her, except for this memory. This is the only memory that got me through her death. It not only makes me smile every time I think of it, but it's my favorite memory of all time because I'm so lucky to remember her for who she was. My dad was retired military. When I was pregnant with my son, he came to stay at my house near my due date. Things start happening and off we go to the hospital, my husband driving me in his car, and my brother and dad following in their car. I had a truly horrible and very long contraction right before we got to the hospital. So my husband calls my dad to tell him the new plan. He was going to grab a wheelchair for me, and then my dad was going to take me in to get admitted while the other two parked the cars. So we get out of the cars, and I'm sobbing, leaning on my dad while waiting for the wheelchair. He asks me if I'm okay, I think just as a reflex. Obviously, I say no. I can barely focus through the pain, and this is not a light, delicate tear slowly rolling down my cheek situation. So the wheelchair comes and I get in it. My dad starts pushing and hauls ass through the doors, where I see there is a line of people waiting to check in at the front desk. Dad doesn't even attempt to wait in line. He goes directly to the side of the desk as fast as he can push my fully pregnant self. He doesn't look like he's planning on stopping for the little old lady who's being helped, so I put my feet out to stop the wheelchair and prevent her from being hit. Luckily she doesn't take very long, and my dad soon pushes me up a little further to talk to the woman behind the desk. "Hi, yeah, my daughter is in labor, she needs to be checked in right away." "Okay sir, we can do that, we just need some ID from you." Now at this point, he's behind me so I can't see him, but the contraction is finally starting to subside, so I'm calming down a little bit. But I can hear the disgust dripping from his voice when he says, "She's about to have a baby and you're worried about my ID?" She tells him yes, she doesn't need anything from me, but she does need to make a quick ID sticker for him. So logically the next thing he says is, "Okay fine, here's my driver's license, military ID, credit cards, what else do you need? Can we go now?" While emptying his entire wallet and tossing random cards on the desk. My dad was a career military man, and I have rarely seen him lose his cool. But the memory of him losing his shit and trying to help while I was in pain always makes me smile. My wife was my blind date to the senior prom. I'd have to say that my first time seeing her is a memory that always makes me smile. That, or when she said yes to a second date. Or when she said yes to marrying me. Basically my wife in general. I worked as a homeless street outreach worker for a couple of years. My coworker and I saw a guy standing near a river. We felt something wasn't right and parked. My coworker and I convinced the person that killing themselves isn't worth it. A few weeks later that person confronted my coworker and thanked him for being there that night. That person had found an apartment and felt that their life was finally gotten on track. I did arts and crafts, story time, etc. as a volunteer at the children's hospital. Definitely when my favorite kid found a bone marrow donor. They have a large golden bell at the front of the ward that kids ring when they finish chemotherapy. She hadn't finished yet, but she just went up to the bell and karate chopped it. The last afternoon I spent with my grandma. She was such a firecracker, always joking around and giving people the bird. We had a great time, just the two of us. She passed away in September 2019, about 2 months after her husband. I miss them both, but thinking about that last afternoon with her always makes me smile. The first time my daughter spoke an intelligible word. She woke up in the morning and looking at me said "Papa." The funny part is that my wife had, according to her, the perfect plan. She would say, repeatedly, to the baby, the word "Papa," then, supposedly, When the baby would need anything she would call me and not my wife. It worked until a certain point. Now she's jealous that the first word was papa. But, when the baby wants something she calls for her mommy, most of the time. Mine is a little bittersweet because we lost the baby. But during my first pregnancy, it came as a surprise cause I was on birth control. My fiancé and I were so scared of what was to come. My fiancé was terrified and had no idea how to react and seemed more detached. Until one night I was starving and I couldn't keep anything down. He gets up, it's like 3 a.m., runs to the kitchen and comes back with a bowl of raviolis. I clearly remember disagreeing with the thought of eating it, but I was so hungry that I had to at least try it. Well, I kept it down with no problems, much to my shock. My fiancé laid his head down on my belly, rubbed it softly and said, "Wow, you're already so much like me. Driving your mommy bonkers and you'll only eat raviolis." That will stay with me until my dying breath, and it was so wholesome I can't help but tear up and smile. My mom found out she had stage 4 lung cancer when I was 2 and passed away when I was 6. When she got diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live, so, needless to say, she gave us lots of amazing memories and really lived in the moment. The one story I always tell when talking about my mom was how one day she let me and my older sister stay home, which was a big deal in 1st and 3rd grade already. We went to Bulk Barn and got every item we wanted. When we got home, we snuggled in my parents' bed, spread out what felt like a never-ending amount of bags of chocolate/candy, and watched Disney movies all afternoon. When my dad came home from work, he just jumped right in and joined us. It was right before she went into hospice and the last good day I remember her having before she passed, so the memory holds a special place in my heart. One time my brother said something funny while I was eating cereal and I had a huge mouthful of unchewed mini wheats and milk and I started to laugh. But then my sister said something funnier and then I thought of the most epic funny thing to say, but I was trapped in the state of laughter / trying not to spit out or choke on my food. Which actually made me laugh even harder because of the situation I was in. Then my brother looks at me like, "WTF is wrong with you?" and I just point at him and then my sister and then myself, and it was so stupid and I just fell to the floor crying with laughter. Pretty sure it was a dream or something I imagined. I remember walking down a dirt road with heavy swamp vegetation, reeds mostly, growing on both sides and dense tree branches hanging over the road around 10 a.m. at the end of June with patches of sunshine barely making it to the dirt below. I was a kid and was walking with a friend. It's where I go when I need to calm down. If I remember it. My daughter was born in July. The following fall she often would cry at night. I would wrap her in a blanket and take her for a walk. Moments after we got into the cool fall air, she would fall asleep, but I would make the walk last as long as I could. Now every fall when the first cool evening hits I smile and often take a walk. Well, I was hitting a real low point and my friend invited me over. I still had all these thoughts in my head, until she opens the door and her big-ass Siberian husky jumps on me and starts to lick my face. I started giggling and literally, all my worries went kaput. My favorite childhood memory is, and always will be, sitting at the kitchen table having a coffee with my mom. We would just sit and talk for hours about everything over a pot of coffee. Truthfully, every time I have a coffee I think of those times and smile. That probably contributes to my caffeine addiction. I need a coffee to get through my day has a totally different meaning for me. That joyful thought always rights whatever wrong is going on. She lives several states away now and is getting older. I don't know how many coffee talks we have left, but I'll always have the ones we've already had. My husband and I have a habit of touching feet when we sleep, a nice cute comfort thing because cuddling in your sleep is just impractical and sweaty. Once we were napping in the study on the inflatable mattress. We were head to toe because I was trying to use my phone while charging it. We fell asleep, and I woke up and instinctively reached my toes to his toes. I heard a muffled "hey," because I forgot we were head to toe and shoved my feet around his head instead. It's been 10 years and I still laugh thinking about it. I got to spend an entire week staying with my grandmother once when I was a child. That week was the best since I love my grandmother. We would scrapbook, sew, bake cookies, and do puzzles together. I was so happy to be able to spend time with her like that. She was my favorite person in the world. I loved my grandmother so much that when I was a little kid what I wanted to be when I grew up was a grandmother. She's no longer alive, so I'm relearning how to sew during the quarantine and am going to make a quilt with some of her old quilt blocks. There's a few, but one is super heartwarming to me. For context, my grandparents were always super religious and fairly old-fashioned, but they were cool with it. If they saw something they didn't like, you know what they'd do? They'd give you a smile, tell you to have a good life, in a sweet way, and go on their way. One day, as most little kids do, I drew a picture. It was of an alien on Earth saying, "Wow, I'm on Earth." I gave it to my grandpa. Instead of throwing it away and lecturing me about the Bible like most people I knew would, he hung it up on the wall next to his side of the bed. It was still there, around 10 years later, when he died. It was still there, around 4 to 5 years after his death, when Grandma died. My stupid little drawing, drawn by a little kid and given to a person who could have thrown it away, was put in a place of honor for the majority of the time I knew my grandparents. I'm crying right now. I'm gonna have to go up there and see if it's still there and ask if I can have it. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.